Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm John Tucker. Here are the stories we're following today.
John, we begin with the latest from the Middle East. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has fled to Moscow. Syrian rebels reached Damascus over the weekend and overthrew Assad's government following nearly 14 years of civil war. We get more from Bloomberg's Stuart Livingston Wallace.
I think you would find a constituency out there that said it took 5 decades to get rid of them. But, you know, in terms of the more immediate past, it was less than 2 weeks. And I think it was what surprised everyone was the speed at which it happened on a number of fronts. So, number one, that the opposition forces, and there are many, many of them, managed to unify and work together and move very rapidly. Secondly, at how weak the Assad regime proved to be when under a little bit of pressure. And then the third really important thing is how reluctant both Russia and Iran were to step in, because there was certainly an assumption among some analysts that Russia would absolutely intervene, and that just didn't happen.
Bloomberg's Stuart Livingston Wallace says looters have started raiding the presidential palace and people have taken to the streets of Damascus to celebrate the Assad regime's demise.
And now Israeli ground forces have crossed into Syria for the first time in more than 50 years. Israel's foreign minister confirmed that they've struck chemical weapons facilities in Syria in what's described as a preventative measure. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu welcomed the fall of Assad, who was a key ally of Iran and Lebanon's Hezbollah militant group.
This is a historic day for the Middle East. The collapse of the Assad regime, the tyranny in Damascus, offers great opportunity, but also is fraught with significant dangers. This collapse is a direct result of our forceful action against Hezbollah and Iran, Assad's main supporters. It set off a chain reaction of all those who want to free themselves from this tyranny and its oppression.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the collapse of the Assad regime in Syria may help advance a deal to release the hostages held in Gaza.
And over the weekend, John, the U.S. hit dozens of Islamic State targets in central Syria. President Biden is cautioning Assad's fall from power could open the door to a resurgence of Islamic extremism.
We're clear-eyed about the fact that ISIS will try to take advantage of any vacuum to reestablish its capabilities and to create a safe haven. We will not let that happen.
President Biden spoke from the White House as his administration keeps up heavy involvement in Israel's multi-front war.
And before the Assad regime's downfall, President-elect Donald Trump spoke to NBC's Meet the Press for his first network TV interview since the election win. Trump telling moderator Kristen Welker one of his first-day priorities will be issuing pardons to the Capitol Hill rioters on January 6, 2021.
I'm going to look at everything. We're going to look at individual cases,
Okay.
But I'm going to be acting very quickly.
The president-elect also repeating his threat to impose tariffs on Canada and Mexico. He says he doesn't think it'll cost American consumers anything, but he can't guarantee it.
I can't guarantee anything. I can't guarantee tomorrow. But I can say that if you look at just pre-COVID, we had the greatest economy in the history of our country.
President-elect Trump also promised to end birthright citizenship through executive action, even though the 14th Amendment guarantees citizenship to people born in U.S. territory.
If somebody sets a foot, just a foot, 1 foot, you don't need to, on our land, congratulations, you are now a citizen of the United States of America. Yes, we're going to end that because it's ridiculous.
The president-elect was also asked about a key personnel decision.
Will you try to replace Jerome Powell?
No, I don't think so. I don't see it, but I think if I told him to, he would.
Donald Trump also said he has spoken with Chinese President Xi Jinping in recent days. It's the first time he's mentioned direct contact with the Chinese leader since his election win. And you can hear NBC's Meet the Press every Sunday on Bloomberg Radio.
And we want to update you on the political crisis in Asia. South Korea's Justice Ministry has banned President Yoon Suk-yeol from traveling overseas. The ban comes as multiple investigations are underway following the embattled leader's brief declaration of martial law. The Kospi benchmark stock index closed down a further 2.8% today, bringing its slide since the martial law declaration to more than 5%.
On the flip side, John, Hong Kong's benchmark index jumped 2.8%. Those gains came as China's top leaders announced they plan to loosen monetary policy and expand fiscal spending next year. The move is seen as a sign of confidence against President-elect Trump's trade threats and is expected to boost the Chinese economy.
Talking about spending, another major story we're following this morning comes from the world of sports. Baseball star Juan Soto has signed the richest contract ever in the sport. And let's get the latest from Bloomberg's John Stasher. John, good morning.
Good morning, John. This is what Mets fans were hoping for when Steve Cohen bought the team, that no one would outspend him. Soto's deal with the Mets is for 15 years. That takes him to age 41. It's worth $765 million, so he'll make $51 million a year. And if he doesn't opt out in 5 years, that salary grows to $55 million. Unlike Shohei Ohtani's deal last year with the Dodgers, none of the salary is deferred. The Yankees, in their attempt to keep Soto, apparently finished a close second. Their offer reportedly worth $760 million. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports. John and Nathan.
Okay, John, thank you. We're going to get more reaction to the historic Soto deal in a few minutes coming up in sports. But turning back to markets now, we're watching shares of Interpublic Group in early trading. They are surging nearly 14%. The Wall Street Journal is reporting Omnicom Group is in advanced talks to buy Interpublic in a deal that would create the world's largest advertising firm.
All right, thanks, Nathan. That brings us to 5:07 on Wall Street. Time for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, John. The hunt for the gunman who killed United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson in Manhattan has involved following leads in multiple states, according to law enforcement sources. NYPD divers have been scouring a pond in Central Park looking for evidence. New York Mayor Eric Adams would not say much about what divers hope to find.
I don't want to do anything that's going to infringe on these investigators. Some of them have been up throughout the night while this investigation is taking place, but every piece is important to that puzzle.
The backpack the shooter is seen wearing in video was found in Central Park Friday, and late Saturday, police released new photos of the suspect seen in a taxi after the killing. Billionaire hip-hop mogul Jay-Z has been added to an existing civil lawsuit against Sean Diddy Combs. He's being accused by an unidentified woman of sexually assaulting her when she was a 13-year-old girl. The incident allegedly happening after the 2000 VMAs. Jay-Z vehemently denies the claim. A jury in New York will deliberate for a fifth day today in the trial of Daniel Penny. The judge presiding over the case dismissed the manslaughter charge after the jury was unable to reach a unanimous decision. Penny could face up to 4 years in prison if convicted on the charge of criminally negligent homicide. He put Neely in a chokehold on the subway in New York City last year. It is possible that the jury could find him guilty of criminal negligence, which is a lower standard of culpability than manslaughter. President Joe Biden hosted this year's Kennedy Center honorees at the White House before attending the 47th Kennedy Center Honors late last night. This year's honorees are the Grateful Dead, Bonnie Raitt, Arturo Sandoval, the Apollo Theater, and filmmaker Francis Ford Coppola.
Francis, I'm looking for work in February. So maybe you've got something for me and a Biden-De Niro combination here. I can't sing, I can't act, I can't dance, do a damn thing, but I can help you.
Also at the Kennedy Center Honors, First Lady Dr. Jill Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, and Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. John.
Michael, thank you. And time now. That it brings us to 5:10. John Stasher back now for the rest of the sports news being brought to you by your Tri-State Audi dealers. John, good morning.
Good morning, John. Juan Soto, only 26 years old. He's already accomplished so much, both individually, and he led Washington to a world championship and the Yankees to a pennant, and that's what made him so appealing as a free agent. Several teams expressed interest, but in the end, it, as expected, apparently came down to the Mets and Yankees, with the Mets offer of a total package worth $765 million, just $5 million more than the Yankee offer. What may have clinched the deal for the Mets is that if Soto doesn't opt out after 5 years, his salary grows. The deal could exceed $800 million. Just how bad has this NFL season in New York been over the past 2 months? The combined record of the Jets and Giants, 1-16. Both teams had chances to win in Week 14, especially the Jets. In Miami, they only trailed second half for 3.5 minutes. They retook the lead on a field goal, but allowed the Dolphins to return the ensuing kickoff 45 yards. They were able to tie the game, and then they won the coin flip flip, and in overtime marched down the field. Miami beat the Jets 32-26 on a touchdown pass to Tagovailoa to Jonnu Smith. Jets' fourth straight loss. They've dropped 7 of the last 8. The Giants have lost all of their last 8. Hosting New Orleans, they had virtually no offense in the first half. Did come alive late. Had a 13-play, 82-yard touchdown drive. They were in position to send the game to overtime, needing only a Graham Gano chip shot field goal. It was blocked, and the Saints won 14-11. The Giants coach, Brian Daboll.
Thought they battled their tails off. I was proud of the way they competed, and we came up short. And it's tough, you put everything into it, and you lose a game there at the end. And there's plenty of plays that could have made a difference, but we came up short.
Giants still winless at home. One more defeat ties the club record for the longest losing skid. Last night, Kansas City went to 12-1. Narrow win over the Chargers, 19-17. John Stashauer, Bloomberg Sports. John and Nathan.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager. The world is bracing for more potential chaos in the Middle East after the rapid advance on Damascus that led to the downfall of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's government. The first time an Assad member has not been leading the Syrian regime in more than half a century. Joining us now, Bloomberg News Director for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, Rosalind Matheson. Roz, good morning. These developments over just the last weekend have been head-spinning. How did this rebel advance happen so quickly? What do we know about this group that seems to have overrun the Syrian military? Good morning.
Well, as you say, it was pretty startling how quickly it happened in the end. We saw them start with Aleppo and then move through a series of cities, but advancing on Damascus with great speed. It seems as though the Syrian army didn't really put up any resistance, abandoned some of their posts. Indeed, whatever control Assad had over his military seems to have faded very quickly, and that just shows again, internally Syria for years has been a crumbling state, even with his very strong and arguably quite repressive rule. So in the minute, the military didn't support him, and so they faded away, and the rebels moved very quickly, and as we saw, with speed that shocked not just the rest of the world, but also seems to have shocked Assad himself.
So what happens next, Roz, with Assad apparently now seeking asylum in Moscow? What is the risk of a power vacuum, another power vacuum once again in the Middle East?
Well, that is the real question, because if you look at other examples around the world, Gaddafi, of course, Saddam Hussein in Iraq, other times when you have a very, very strong man leader who is taken out, what comes in their place, because they really kind of kept the country stitched together. So the question is, what comes up now? Of course, we do have the rebel group known as HTS, which led the charge here. Their leader, Mohammed al-Julani, does he try and form a government? Does he try and bring these other rebel groups in the country together? Of course, that's a splinter group from al-Qaeda, but there are a lot of other players in the country. And how do you go from military operations to being political players? They don't really have experience in politics. How do you form a government? How do you run government ministries? How workable is that? So there's a lot of questions around that. There's a lot we don't know about how or when a government or a new administration might come. We also don't know what opportunities this might give others in that vacuum. I mean, you saw the U.S. President Joe Biden yesterday and others warning about Islamic State, which is still operating in Syria. That's why U.S. troops are there to try and contain ISIS. So does this give them an opportunity to try and regroup?
And we've seen reports as well that Israeli ground troops are now in a Syrian buffer zone, that there have been strikes on suspected chemical weapons plants in Syria as well. What does this say about the power dynamic in the Middle East right now when Israel is fighting a multi-front war and Iran, which had also been backing Syria, appears to be something on a bit of a back foot potentially?
Well, the chessboard on this is very interesting. As you say, the two key allies, Russia and Iran, didn't really come in militarily to save Assad. And that's because they're dealing with their own conflicts, Russia with Ukraine, Iran with its proxies, as you were saying, in the region in Lebanon and Gaza and not inclined to step in. So where does that leave them in this? Where does it leave Turkey, of course, which has got a strong interest in what happens in Syria and arguably is in a position now to influence events on the ground, and for Israel, of course, because they've got that border area. And as Benjamin Netanyahu was saying yesterday, very much a defensive move for now. In that buffer zone, which has operated for nearly 50 years, the Syrian army abandoned their posts, and that's, obviously a concern for Israel in maintaining its border area. So they zipped in there to the buffer zone in what he was saying is a defensive move and perhaps a bit further into Syrian territory. They're also worried about who's going to control weapons in Syria in all of this, the question of whether there are chemical weapons facilities still in Syria. So obviously concerned about that, which is why we've seen the strikes that Israel has announced today, and that will be expected to continue. But that's largely appearing to be a defensive move by Israel.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak, your morning podcast on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed by 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 92.9 in Boston, and nationwide on Sirius XM Channel 121.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, now with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto interfaces.
And don't forget to subscribe to Bloomberg News Now. It's the latest news whenever you want it in 5 minutes or less. Search Bloomberg News Now on your favorite podcast platform to stay informed all day long. I'm John Tucker.
And I'm Nathan Hager. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.